The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder, sending a flock of starlings scattering into the crimson sunset as Elizabeth Franklin clutched her younger sister's arm. Both women pressing their backs against the rough edge of the cliff that had moments ago seemed like salvation, but now marked the boundary of their desperate situation. The year was 1876, and the untamed territory of Idaho offered little mercy to those who found themselves cornered. "Ellie, I'm scared," whispered Abigail Franklin, her 20-year-old frame trembling despite the heat of the late August evening. Her normally vibrant eyes were wide with terror as she stared across the small clearing to where 5 men on horseback emerged from the tree line, their expressions cold and calculating beneath the brims of their dust-covered hats. Elizabeth, 24 and fiercely protective, positioned herself slightly in front of her sister. "Stay behind me, Abby," she murmured, though she knew there was nowhere to go. The 70-foot drop behind them meant certain death, while the approaching outlaws promised a fate she refused to contemplate. "Well now, what do we have here?" The leader of the gang, a pock-faced man with yellowed teeth and a week's worth of stubble, urged his horse forward. "Told you boys I saw 2 pretty birds fly this way." His hand rested casually on his holstered pistol. "The Franklin sisters, if I ain't mistaken. Your daddy's got a mighty fine price on your return." Elizabeth straightened her spine. "Our father died 3 months ago, Mr. Holloway." "Whatever grievance you had with him died too." Jed Holloway's smile disappeared. "That's so. Well, seems to me his debt's passed to his kin, and from what I hear, you girls are sitting on a gold mine that rightfully belongs to me and my partners." "We don't know anything about gold," Abigail protested, her voice barely audible. Holloway dismounted, the spurs on his boots jingling ominously in the silence. "Don't play innocent with me, girl. Your pa stole those maps from us before we could stake our claim." He took a step forward. "Now, we can do this easy or hard. You hand over those maps and maybe we let you walk away." Elizabeth knew it was a lie. These men hadn't tracked them for 3 days just to let them go. "We burned the maps," she said, the half-truth bitter on her tongue. The maps were indeed destroyed, but Elizabeth had memorized them, determined to use what her father had discovered to build a new life for herself and Abby. "That's mighty unfortunate for you," Holloway snarled, drawing his pistol. "Boys, seems we got ourselves a situation that requires persuasion." As the outlaws closed in, the sisters pressed harder against the rock face, searching desperately for an escape that didn't exist. Then came the whistle, sharp, clear, and commanding. It froze everyone in place. A lone figure appeared on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the deepening sky. In one fluid motion, the stranger descended the rocky slope with the grace of someone born to the saddle, though he now moved on foot, leading a chestnut stallion behind him. "Evening, gentlemen," the newcomer called, his voice carrying an easy confidence that belied the tension in the air. "Seems to me 5 against 2 isn't particularly sporting, especially when the 2 are ladies." Elizabeth could now see him clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair curled slightly beneath a well-worn hat, and though he wore no badge, something about his bearing suggested authority. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Holloway warned. "Ride on if you know what's good for you." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Cole Deveraux, and I've never been one for taking good advice." He positioned himself between the outlaws and the sisters, his stance casual but prepared. "Now, why don't you boys mount up and find somewhere else to be before this gets unpleasant?" One of Holloway's men spat on the ground. "You deaf? There's 5 of us and 1 of you. I count 5 men who'll need to draw, aim, and fire without hitting each other," Cole replied evenly. against one man who's already decided where each bullet's going. His coat shifted slightly, revealing a holstered Colt. Those aren't odds I'd bet on. Elizabeth watched as uncertainty crept into the outlaw's expressions. This cold Deveraux carried himself like a man who'd faced worse situations and walked away. Holloway's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." In a movement almost too quick to follow, Cole's hand dropped to his side, and his revolver appeared as if conjured from thin air. The shot that followed struck the ground between Holloway's feet with surgical precision. "Next one won't be a warning," Cole stated flatly. Tension hung in the air like a physical presence until Holloway slowly holstered his weapon. "This isn't over," he promised, his eyes burning with malice as he looked from Cole to Elizabeth. "We'll be seeing you again, Miss Franklin." "I'll be looking forward to it," Cole replied, his gun remaining steady. With reluctant motions, the outlaws mounted their horses and retreated into the gathering dusk, casting venomous glances over their shoulders. Only when they disappeared from view did Cole holster his weapon and turn to the sisters. "Are you ladies hurt?" Elizabeth, still processing the rapid turn of events, shook her head. "No, thanks to you. How did you find you? I've been tracking Holloway's gang for 2 days." He approached carefully, respectful of their space after such a harrowing encounter. "They don't exactly travel quietly." "Why would you track them?" Abigail asked, finally finding her voice. A shadow crossed Cole's face. "Let's just say we have unfinished business." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Night's falling fast, and they'll be back with reinforcements once their pride heals a bit. We need to move." Elizabeth hesitated. "Mr. Deveraux, Cole," he corrected gently. "Cole," she acknowledged. "While we're grateful for your help, we don't know you. How can we trust that your intentions are any better than theirs?" His expression softened. "You can't. Not yet. But right now, I'm offering you a way down from this cliff that doesn't involve Holloway or a 70-foot fall. The rest we can figure out along the trail." Elizabeth studied him, weighing their options. Something in his direct gaze made her want to trust him, despite her better judgment. "How exactly do you propose to get us down?" Cole smiled, a genuine one this time that transformed his weathered features. "That's the interesting part. There's a path not 20 yards from here, narrow and hidden but passable. I spotted it on my way up." He gestured toward a section of the cliff face that appeared, to Elizabeth's eye, identical to the rest. "It'll take us to a small valley where I've got a camp set up." Abigail looked to her sister, silently deferring to her judgment as she always had. After a moment's consideration, Elizabeth nodded. "Lead the way, Mr. Deveraux Cole, but know that I sleep light and shoot straight." His smile widened. "I'd expect nothing less, Miss Franklin." "Elizabeth," she offered. "And this is my sister, Abigail." Cole tipped his hat to them both. "A pleasure, despite the circumstances. Now, if you'll follow me closely, we should reach the valley before full dark." He led them to what appeared to be a solid rock face, then pushed aside a curtain of hanging vines to reveal a narrow trail carved into the cliffside. "Watch your step," he advised, taking Elizabeth's hand to help her onto the path. "It's not as treacherous as it looks, but it demands respect." The warmth of his calloused palm against her sent an unexpected flutter through Elizabeth's chest, one she immediately attributed to the lingering effects of their near-death experience. Yet as they began their careful descent, she found herself wondering about the mysterious cowboy who had appeared from nowhere to create a path where none had seemed possible. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that perhaps their journey had only just begun. The narrow path twisted down the cliff face like a snake, barely visible in the fading light. Cole moved with the confidence of a mountain goat, occasionally reaching back to steady Elizabeth when the trail grew particularly treacherous. Behind her, Abigail followed closely, her usual chatter silenced by concentration. The path was made by the Nez Perce, Cole explained, pausing to help them navigate a sharp turn. They've lived in these lands for generations before any white settlers arrived. Elizabeth studied the careful handholds carved into the rock. You seem to know a lot about the native trails. A flash of something, perhaps memory, perhaps pain, crossed Cole's features. I spent some time with them as a boy. My father was a trapper who traded fairly with the tribes. They taught me things no schoolroom ever could. The mention of fathers made Elizabeth's throat tighten. 3 months wasn't long enough to dull the sharp edges of grief. Our father was a surveyor, she offered, uncertain why she felt compelled to share. He came west to map new territories for the railroad, but she trailed off. Cole glanced back, his eyes understanding. But he found something more valuable than train routes. Gold, Abigail whispered from behind them. At least that's what those men think. Father never told us exactly what he found, only that it would change our fortunes. Cole nodded thoughtfully, but said nothing more as they continued their descent. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the western mountains, they reached the bottom of the cliff. A small valley spread before them, sheltered on 3 sides by rising rock walls and on the 4th by a dense stand of pine trees. "We'll be safe here for tonight," Cole announced, leading them toward a small camp nestled under an overhanging rock. A fire pit had been prepared but not yet lit, and a pack horse grazed nearby, tethered to a stake. Elizabeth took in the setup with an appraising eye. "You were planning to stay here before you found us." Cole nodded as he struck a match and carefully lit the waiting kindling. "I've been tracking Holloway for a while. This valley offers protection and a clear view of anyone approaching." As the fire caught, warm light illuminated his features. "Are either of you injured? Even small scrapes can turn nasty out here." Abigail sank gratefully onto a log beside the growing fire. "Just tired and frightened," she admitted. "And hungry. We lost our provisions yesterday when we had to abandon our wagon." Cole rummaged through his saddlebags and produced some jerky, hardtack, and a canteen of water. "It's not much, but it'll keep your strength up. Tomorrow we can try to shoot something fresh." Elizabeth accepted the offered food with murmured thanks, realizing suddenly how famished she was. As they ate, the valley grew dark around them, the only light coming from their small fire and the emerging stars above. "May I ask where you ladies are headed?" Cole finally broke the comfortable silence that had settled over them. Elizabeth exchanged a glance with her sister. "Lewiston," she answered after a moment's hesitation. "We have a distant cousin there who might take us in, at least until we can establish ourselves." Cole's eyebrows rose slightly. "Lewiston's nearly a week's ride from here, assuming you've got horses." "We did," Abigail sighed, "before we had to flee our wagon." Elizabeth straightened her shoulders. "We'll manage, we always have." Cole studied her across the fire, the flames reflecting in his gray eyes. "I've no doubt. But Holloway and his men won't give up easily, especially if they believe you know where to find gold." He tossed another small branch onto the fire. "I'm heading to Lewiston myself. If you'd accept the company, I'd be glad to escort you." Elizabeth's immediate instinct was to refuse. She'd been caring for herself and Abigail since their mother died years ago, and their father's frequent absences had taught her self-reliance. But practicality overrode pride. 2 women alone in the wilderness, pursued by outlaws, faced slim odds of reaching Lewiston alive. "Why would you do that?" she asked instead, searching his face for hidden motives. Cole met her gaze directly. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because Holloway has something that belongs to me, something I aim to reclaim. Our paths align, at least for now." What did he take from you? Abigail asked, her curiosity always getting the better of her caution. A muscle twitched in Cole's jaw. My brother's life. The stark answer hung in the air between them. Elizabeth felt a pang of empathy. She recognized the look of someone carrying a burden of grief and responsibility. I'm sorry, she said softly. Cole nodded in acknowledgement. It was 2 years ago. James was a deputy marshal in Montana Territory. Holloway's gang robbed a bank there and my brother pursued them. They ambushed him near the Idaho border. His voice remained steady, but Elizabeth could hear the controlled pain beneath the words. I was a ranger in Texas then. By the time I got word and made it north, the trail was cold. Been tracking them ever since. You're a Texas Ranger? Abigail asked, eyes wide. Cole corrected. I turned in my badge to find justice for James. The law moves too slowly sometimes, and jurisdictions get complicated across territories. Elizabeth understood the implication. So you're hunting them? I prefer to think of it as bringing them to justice, Cole replied, though his tone suggested the distinction might be academic. Holloway and his men have left a trail of bodies from Montana to Oregon. They need to be stopped. And after that? Elizabeth asked. What then? Cole poked at the fire, sending a shower of sparks upward. Haven't thought that far ahead. Maybe return to Texas, maybe find somewhere new to put down roots. He looked up, his expression softening slightly. One day at a time has been my philosophy lately. Elizabeth nodded, understanding completely. After their father's death, she too had been existing one day to the next, focused solely on keeping Abigail safe and finding them a new start. We accept your offer, she said finally, at least as far as Lewiston. Relief flickered across Cole's features. Good. We'll set out at first light. The horses can carry double for a while, but we'll need to find mounts for you both when we reach the next settlement. He rose to his feet. You ladies should get some rest. I'll take first watch. Wake me for the second, Elizabeth insisted. You need rest too. Cole looked like he might argue, but then nodded in agreement. 3 hours, then. As he moved to the edge of the firelight to begin his vigil, Abigail leaned close to Elizabeth. I think we can trust him, Ellie, she whispered, using her childhood nickname for her sister. Elizabeth watched Cole's silhouette against the starlit sky. I think so too, she admitted. But trust is a luxury we can't fully afford right now. He saved our lives, Abigail reminded her. Yes, he did. Elizabeth pulled their father's old blanket from her pack and spread it for them both. And tomorrow we'll see what kind of path he makes for us in the daylight. As she settled beside her sister, Elizabeth found her thoughts returning to the mysterious cowboy keeping watch over them. There was something about Cole Deveraux, a depth of character, a steadiness that she hadn't encountered before in her 24 years. It intrigued her almost as much as it unsettled her. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, her dreams were filled with narrow paths, falling rocks, and a pair of storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Dawn broke clear and cool across the valley. Elizabeth woke to find Cole already up, tending a small fire and brewing coffee in a battered tin pot. He'd taken the last watch after all, letting both sisters sleep through the night. Hope you don't mind, he said, noticing her stirring. You both needed the rest more than I needed the sleep. Elizabeth sat up, running a hand through her tangled auburn hair. That wasn't our agreement. His mouth quirked into a half-smile. Consider it a one-time courtesy. He poured dark coffee into a tin cup and offered it to her. Peace offering. The rich aroma tempted her, and Elizabeth accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. Just don't make a habit of it. I pull my own weight. Wouldn't dream of questioning that, Cole replied, genuine respect in his tone. As Abigail awakened and joined them, Cole outlined his plan. There's a trading post about 15 miles east of here. We should reach it by midday if we push. They might have horses for sale or at least news of Holloway's movements. Will your horses be all right carrying double? Elizabeth asked, eyeing the animals. For 15 miles, yes. We'll alternate walking to give them breaks. Cole handed Abigail a cup of coffee and some jerky. Eat up. Once we're on the move, stops will be brief. They broke camp efficiently, leaving little trace of their presence. Cole helped each sister mount Abigail on his pack horse and Elizabeth behind him on his chestnut stallion. The closeness required by their shared seat made Elizabeth acutely aware of his broad shoulders and the solid warmth of him as they set off at a steady pace. The morning passed in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they navigated the rugged terrain. Occasionally, Cole would point out tracks or signs that Elizabeth might have missed a broken twig here. Disturbed earth, they're always alert to the possibility of pursuit. By late morning, they paused in a small clearing beside a stream to rest the horses. "May I ask you something?" Abigail ventured as they refilled canteens. Cole looked up from where he was checking his stallion's hooves. "Of course. How did you know we were the Franklin sisters?" "You called us that last night." Cole straightened. "Holloway did, but I'd heard of you before. Your father's reputation was known in surveying circles." He hesitated. "And there were rumors about his discovery." Elizabeth frowned. "What kind of rumors?" "That he'd found something significant in these mountains. Not just gold, as most assume, but something more permanent. A vein of ore or perhaps even silver." Cole shrugged. Prospectors' tales grow with each telling, but there was enough smoke to suggest fire. Elizabeth exchanged a glance with Abigail. Their father had been tight-lipped about his discoveries, sharing only that he'd found something that would secure their future. The maps he'd made, the ones Elizabeth had memorized before burning, showed locations, but not what lay beneath the marked spots. "If there is anything to find," Elizabeth said carefully, "it belongs to us, not Holloway or anyone else." Cole raised his hands. "I have no claim on your father's discoveries, Miss Franklin. My only interest is in Holloway and his gang." A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft sounds of the horses drinking from the stream. "I think," Abigail said suddenly, "that we should use first names if we're to be traveling companions. Miss Franklin sounds so formal when someone has saved your life." Cole's expression softened. "I'd like that, Abigail. Most people call me Abby," she offered with a smile. Elizabeth watched this exchange with mixed emotions. Her sister had always been quick to warm to people, while Elizabeth's natural caution made her slower to extend trust. Yet something about Cole's straightforward manner made her want to bridge that gap. "Elizabeth is a mouthful on the trail," she found herself saying. "Ellie will do." Cole's smile reached his eyes this time. "Ellie and Abby it is, then." The simple exchange somehow shifted the air between them, easing the tension. As they continued their journey, conversation flowed more freely. Cole shared stories of his time as a ranger, while the sisters spoke of their childhood in St. Louis before their father's work had brought them west. By early afternoon, they crested a rise to see smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. The trading post, little more than a collection of rough-hewn buildings clustered around a main store, lay in a small valley beside a winding river. "Clearwater Trading Post," Cole announced. "Not much to look at, but it's a stop for travelers between settlements and for trappers coming down from the mountains." As they approached, Elizabeth noted the handful of horses hitched outside the main building and the weathered men moving between structures. A few curious glances came their way. Two women accompanied by a single man wasn't an everyday sight in these remote parts. Cole dismounted first, then helped each sister down. "Stay close," he murmured, his hand lingering on Elizabeth's waist a moment longer than necessary. "Some of these men haven't seen a proper lady in months." "We'll manage," Elizabeth assured him, though she appreciated his concern. Inside the trading post, the air was thick with the scent of tobacco, leather, and coffee. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from ammunition to canned goods. The proprietor, a barrel-chested man with an impressive white beard, looked up as they entered. "Well now, what brings such fine company to my humble establishment?" he called out, his voice carrying the remnants of an Irish brogue. Cole stepped forward. "Need supplies and information, Mr. O'Malley. Seamus O'Malley at your service." The man's keen eyes swept over the trio. "And what might you be looking for beyond the obvious necessities?" "Horses for the ladies," Cole replied. "And any word on a group of riders passing through. 5 men led by one called Holloway." O'Malley's jovial expression cooled. "Holloway, is it? Aye, they were here yesterday. Didn't stay long, but long enough to drink my whiskey and frighten my help." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They're bad business, that lot. Asked about 2 women traveling alone. I told them I hadn't seen hide nor hair of any ladies for weeks." Elizabeth felt a chill despite the store's warmth. "Do you know where they were headed?" O'Malley studied her carefully. "Said something about checking the northern trail toward Lewiston. Seemed in quite a hurry." He straightened. "You the ladies they're hunting?" Cole's hand moved subtly toward his holster. "Would it matter if they were?" the older man snorted. "To me, no. I've no love for Holloway or any man who hunts women. But it might matter to you, considering they left a man watching the road from that ridge yonder." He nodded toward the window. "Been there since dawn. Figured they were expecting someone." Elizabeth's heart sank. "They're waiting for us." Cole's expression hardened as he peered out the grimy window. "So they are, which means we need another route." O'Malley stroked his beard thoughtfully. "There's an old mining trail that leads west before curving north. Adds a day to your journey, but it'll bypass their watchmen. As for horses—" He hesitated. "I've a mare and a gelding I could part with. Not much to look at, but they're sound and trail-wise." "We'll take them," Cole said without hesitation. "And whatever supplies you can spare. We need to move quickly." As O'Malley gathered provisions, Elizabeth pulled Cole aside. "We can't afford 2 horses," she whispered urgently. "Father's money is nearly gone." Cole's expression softened. "Consider it an investment in our mutual survival. I need you both mobile if we're going to outpace Holloway." "I won't be in your debt," Elizabeth insisted. "Then consider it a loan," Cole countered. "To be repaid when we reach Lewiston safely." Before Elizabeth could argue further, the door to the trading post swung open. A young boy of perhaps 12 burst in, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. O'Malley. Riders coming fast from the east." "Looks like the same bunch from yesterday," Cole swore under his breath. "They must have spotted us on the trail." He turned to O'Malley. "Is there a back way out?" The storekeeper nodded grimly. "Through the storeroom. I'll have my boy saddle your horses and bring them around." "We'll pay double for the supplies and horses," Cole promised, already ushering Elizabeth and Abigail toward the back of the store. O'Malley waved him off. "Just keep those ladies safe. And if you manage to put a bullet in Holloway, consider your debt paid in full." They hurried through the storeroom and out a rear door just as the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached them. O'Malley's son, a gangly youth with his father's features, waited with 4 horses, Cole's 2 and the promised mare and gelding. "The brown mare's for the taller lady," the boy explained, handing the reins to Elizabeth. "Gelding's gentler, better for the younger miss." Cole helped Abigail mount her new horse while Elizabeth swung into the saddle of her mare. The animal snorted but stood steady, which Elizabeth took as a promising sign. "Head for the tree line," Cole instructed, pointing toward a dense stand of pines about 200 yards away. "Don't stop until you're well within cover." "What about you?" Elizabeth demanded. Cole checked his revolver. "I'll be right behind you, just need to make sure they don't follow too quickly." Before Elizabeth could protest, shouts erupted from the front of the trading post. Cole slapped her mare's flank. "Go, now." The horse lurched forward, and Elizabeth had no choice but to urge it toward the trees, glancing back to ensure Abigail was following. They galloped across the open ground, the thunder of their horses' hooves drowning out everything but the pounding of Elizabeth's heart. As they reached the edge of the forest, a shot rang out, followed by another. Elizabeth reined in sharply, turning to see Cole exchanging fire with two men by the trading post while scrambling toward his horse. "Ellie, we have to help him," Abigail cried. Before Elizabeth could respond, Cole vaulted into his saddle and spurred his stallion toward them, three riders in hot pursuit. "Ride," he shouted as he drew alongside them. "Follow the game trail northeast." They plunged into the forest, branches whipping past as they urged their mounts through the dense undergrowth. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they navigated the winding trail that only Cole seemed able to discern among the trees. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, Cole signaled for them to slow. "We've got some distance now," he panted, his horse lathered with sweat. "But they won't give up easily." "Were you hit?" Elizabeth asked, noticing how he favored his left side. "Grazed my ribs," he admitted. "Nothing serious." Abigail's face had gone pale. "This is our fault. If you hadn't helped us, then you'd be at Holloway's mercy and I'd still be hunting him," Cole interrupted firmly. "This was my choice, Abby. No regrets." They continued at a more sustainable pace, Cole leading them deeper into the wilderness on trails that seemed invisible until they were directly upon them. As the day waned, Elizabeth found herself marveling at his woodcraft and quiet confidence, even as worry gnawed at her over the blood she could now see darkening his shirt. As twilight settled around them, Cole finally called a halt in a small clearing beside a stream. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he announced. "The horses need it, and so do we." "Let me see your wound first," Elizabeth insisted as they dismounted. Cole tried to wave her off. "It's nothing. It's not nothing if you bleed to death before morning," she retorted, her tone leaving no room for argument. With a sigh, Cole shrugged out of his coat and lifted his shirt to reveal a bloody furrow across his ribs. Elizabeth's breath caught at the sight, not only of the wound but of the lean, muscled torso it marked. Scars from old injuries crisscrossed his skin, telling tales of a life lived hard and dangerous. "Sit," she commanded, recovering her composure. From her pack, she produced a small medical kit, one of the few items she'd insisted on bringing when they fled their home. "Abby, fetch water from the stream, please." As her sister hurried to comply, Elizabeth cleaned the wound with steady hands. "You were lucky. It's not deep." "Told you," Cole said, though his voice was tight with pain he wouldn't otherwise acknowledge. "Still needs stitching," she determined. "Or it'll open again at the first hard ride." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You know how to stitch a wound." "Our father believed in practical education," Elizabeth replied, threading a needle. "This will hurt." "Not my first time being sewn up," Cole assured her, though he tensed as she began. Elizabeth worked efficiently, her fingers steady despite the intimacy of touching this man she barely knew. As she tied off the last stitch and bandaged the wound, she became acutely aware of his eyes on her face, studying her with an intensity that made heat rise to her cheeks. "You have skilled hands, Ellie," he said softly. "Necessity teaches quickly," she replied, packing away her supplies to hide her sudden fluster. "You should rest now." Cole caught her wrist gently as she moved to stand. "Thank you." The simple sincerity in his voice touched something deep inside her. "You're welcome," she managed, before pulling away to help Abigail with the horses. As night deepened around their small camp, Elizabeth found herself watching Cole across the tiny, smokeless fire he'd built. He'd insisted on taking first watch despite his injury, positioning himself where he could see both approaches to their clearing. "He's quite something, isn't he?" Abigail whispered, following her gaze. Elizabeth turned to her sister. "What do you mean?" "Oh, Ellie," Abigail smiled knowingly. "I've seen how you look at him, and how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." "Don't be ridiculous," Elizabeth protested, though her heart quickened traitorously. "We're running for our lives. There's no time for whatever you're implying." "The heart finds time," Abigail replied with the romantic wisdom of her 20 years. "Even in danger, perhaps especially then." Elizabeth had no answer for that. Instead, she wrapped herself in her blanket and turned away, pretending to seek sleep while her mind raced with thoughts of storm-gray eyes and gentle hands. And somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp, she knew, Holloway and his men were hunting them still, drawing ever closer to whatever confrontation fate had written for them all. The next morning dawned misty and cool. They broke camp in silence, the routine already familiar despite their brief acquaintance. Elizabeth noticed that Cole moved more stiffly than before, though he made no complaint about his wound. "How far to Lewiston now?" she asked as they mounted up. "3 days if we push, 4 if we're cautious," Cole replied, scanning the surrounding forest. "But first we need to shake Holloway for good. He knows these territories too well for comfort." They rode north through increasingly rugged country, following game trails and sometimes making their own path where none existed. By midday, they reached a fast-flowing river that cut across their route. "The Clearwater," Cole announced, dismounting to study the churning waters. "Normally, I'd suggest we ford it here, but the spring melt has it running high." Elizabeth surveyed the swollen river with concern. "Is there another crossing?" "There's a ferry about 5 miles downstream," Cole said, "but it would put us back on the main trail where Holloway is likely watching." Abigail pointed upstream. "What about there?" "The river looks narrower." Cole followed her gesture and nodded slowly. "Good eye, Abby, it's narrower but faster. Still, it might be our best option," he remounted. "We'll try it." The spot Abigail had noticed was indeed narrower, perhaps 40 feet across instead of 60, but the water foamed white as it rushed between rocky banks. "I'll go first," Cole decided after studying the crossing. "If my horse makes it, I'll secure a rope for you both to follow." "Be careful," Elizabeth said before she could stop herself, earning a knowing glance from her sister. Cole's smile was reassuring. "Always am." He urged his stallion into the water. The powerful animal fought against the current, step by careful step. Halfway across, it lost footing briefly but recovered, and moments later both horse and rider scrambled onto the far bank. Cole quickly tied a rope to a sturdy tree, then tossed the free end back across to Elizabeth. "Tie this to your saddle horn," he called over the roar of the water. "It'll give you something to brace against if your horse falters." Elizabeth secured the rope and looked to her sister. "I'll go next. Wait until I'm across before you follow." Abigail nodded, her face pale but determined. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth guided her mare into the frigid water. The current immediately pushed against them, stronger than she'd anticipated. The mare snorted in alarm but continued forward, encouraged by Elizabeth's steady hands and voice. They were nearly 3/4 across when disaster struck. A log, carried downriver by the current, slammed into the mare's hindquarters. The horse reared in pain and panic, throwing Elizabeth sideways into the rushing water. The shock of the cold stole her breath as the current dragged her under. She fought to surface, caught a glimpse of sky, then was pulled under again. The rope she'd tied to her saddle horn now threatened to drag her along with her panicked horse. Suddenly, strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her upward. Cole had plunged into the river after her, fighting the current with powerful strokes. Together they broke the surface, gasping for air. "Hold on to me," he shouted over the river's roar. Elizabeth clung to him as he cut the rope connecting her to the now distant horse. With one arm wrapped securely around her, he used the other to swim toward the bank where her mare had managed to scramble ashore. Abigail was shouting from the opposite bank, her face a mask of terror. "Stay there," Cole called to her between labored breaths. "Don't try to cross." After what seemed an eternity of struggling against the relentless current, they reached the shallows. Cole half-carried, half-dragged Elizabeth onto land. Both collapsing in exhaustion on the rocky shore, for long moments, they simply lay there, coughing up river water and gulping air. Elizabeth became aware of Cole's body pressed against hers, his arm still wrapped protectively around her waist. "Thank you," she gasped when she could finally speak. Cole raised himself on one elbow to look down at her, water streaming from his dark hair. "Are you hurt?" She took mental inventory. "Just shaken and cold." His eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her forget the chill. "You scared 10 years off my life, Ellie Franklin." Something in his voice, in the way he said her name, sent warmth flooding through her despite her soaked clothes. Before she could respond, he'd pulled away and was standing. "We need to get you dry before you catch your death," he said, his tone back to practical concern. "And figure out how to get Abby across safely." The moment, whatever it had been, passed, but Elizabeth felt changed by it somehow as Cole helped her to her feet. Abigail remained on the far bank with Cole's horse, while Elizabeth's mare grazed nervously nearby, still spooked from its ordeal. The gelding Abigail had been riding was nowhere to be seen, likely having bolted during the commotion. "What now?" Elizabeth asked, wringing water from her skirt. Cole studied the river thoughtfully. "There's a fallen pine about 100 yards upstream. It might bridge the gap or close enough for me to help Abby across." He looked at Elizabeth. "Can you get a fire started? There's dry tinder in my saddlebag on my horse." Elizabeth nodded, fighting a shiver. "I'll manage." While Cole went to investigate the fallen tree, Elizabeth located her saddlebags, which had thankfully remained attached to her mare. She changed into her spare clothes, the only ones she had left behind a screen of bushes, then gathered what dry wood she could find. By the time Cole returned, she had a small fire crackling. "The tree will work," he announced. "I'm going back for Abby. Stay here and get warm." Elizabeth watched as he worked his way upstream, calling instructions to Abigail across the water. Her sister looked terrified but determined, as she cautiously made her way to the fallen pine that stretched most of the way across the river. Cole balanced on the log, reaching out to offer Abigail his hand for the final, precarious crossing. Elizabeth held her breath as her sister inched across, the rushing water just feet below. When both finally returned to camp safely, Elizabeth embraced Abigail fiercely. "Don't ever scare me like that again." Abigail laughed shakily. "I think that's my line, sister." "You're the one who went swimming." Cole hung his coat near the fire to dry. "We've lost a horse and a day's travel," he said grimly. "And this crossing is visible for miles. We need to move as soon as we're dry enough." "What about Holloway?" Abigail asked. "If he wasn't tracking us before, he will be now," Cole replied. "That fallen tree is the only crossing for miles. When he reaches the river, he'll find it." Elizabeth's heart sank. "So all this was for nothing." "Not nothing," Cole corrected. "We're ahead of him, and now we know for certain he's behind us, not lying in wait." He studied the sky. We have maybe 5 hours of daylight left. If we push hard, we can reach the foothills before dark." "Then what?" Elizabeth pressed. A grim smile crossed Cole's features. "Then we turn the tables. I'm tired of being hunted." There was something in his tone, a cold determination that reminded Elizabeth forcefully that this man had been tracking Holloway long before he met them. Vengeance for his brother still drove him, perhaps more than any desire to protect two women he barely knew. "What exactly do you have in mind?" she asked. Cole met her gaze steadily. "Holloway wants something from you badly enough to chase you across 3 territories. I think it's time we use that to our advantage." "You mean use us as bait?" Elizabeth stated flatly. "No," Cole shook his head firmly. "I mean give Holloway what he thinks he wants on our terms." "The maps," Abigail breathed. "But we burned them." Cole's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Did you?" "All of them," Elizabeth hesitated, weighing her trust in this man against their desperate situation. "I memorized the locations before we destroyed the papers," she admitted finally. "I could recreate them." Something like admiration flickered in Cole's expression. "Smart, very smart." "But if we give Holloway fake maps, he'll know as soon as he checks the locations," Abigail pointed out. "Not if we lead him to something convincing enough," Cole replied. "Something that would occupy him long enough for us to reach Lewiston and alert the authorities." Elizabeth considered the plan. "There's an old mine shaft marked on Father's map, about a day's ride from here in the foothills. It was abandoned years ago after a cave-in, but it looks promising enough to fool someone who doesn't know better." Cole nodded slowly. "That could work. We leave an obvious trail to the mine, plant the maps where he'll find them, then double back on a different route while he's digging in worthless rock." It was risky, Elizabeth knew, dangerous in more ways than one. But as she looked at Cole's confident expression and Abigail's hopeful one, she found herself nodding in agreement. "I'll draw the maps," she said. "But first, let's put some distance between us and this river." They traveled until twilight, making good time despite sharing 2 horses. Elizabeth rode behind Cole, her arms wrapped around his waist, while Abigail took the mare. The closeness was both uncomfortable and oddly comforting, especially after the river incident had left Elizabeth more shaken than she cared to admit. As darkness fell, they made camp in a sheltered hollow surrounded by dense pines. Cole built another small, nearly smokeless fire, while Elizabeth worked on recreating her father's maps with strategic alterations that would lead Holloway to the abandoned mine, rather than the true locations her father had discovered. "These look convincing," Cole commented, examining her handiwork over her shoulder. "Detailed enough to be believable." Elizabeth allowed herself a small smile. "Father taught me well. I assisted him with his surveying work often enough." "A woman of many talents," Cole remarked, and there was something in his tone that made her glance up to find his eyes on her face rather than the maps. The moment stretched between them until Abigail's voice broke the spell. "I'm starving. Is there anything to eat besides jerky tonight?" Cole cleared his throat and moved away. "Actually, yes. I set some snares while you were working. Let me check them." He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Elizabeth with a racing heart and confused emotions. She'd never been one for romantic notions. Practical concerns had always taken precedence in her life. Yet something about Cole, Deveraux, awakened feelings she'd never experienced, feelings that were as inconvenient as they were undeniable. "You're falling for him," Abigail said softly, settling beside her. Elizabeth sighed. "Don't be ridiculous, Abby. We've known him for all of 3 days, most of which we've spent running for our lives." "Sometimes that's all it takes," her sister replied with the certainty of youth. "When it's right, it's right. And sometimes survival is more important than sentiment," Elizabeth countered, though without much conviction. Abigail squeezed her hand. Just because something is inconvenient doesn't make it untrue. Before Elizabeth could respond, Cole returned with 2 rabbits. The conversation turned to more immediate concerns of food and rest, but Abigail's words lingered in Elizabeth's mind as they ate. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Cole insisted on taking first watch again despite Elizabeth's protests. "You need rest more than I do," he argued. "That river took more out of you than you're admitting." Elizabeth couldn't deny it. Every muscle ached from fighting the current, and exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. Still, she was reluctant to yield. "Wake me for second watch," she insisted. "Promise me, Cole." His expression softened. "I promise. Now get some sleep, Ellie." As she settled beside her already sleeping sister, Elizabeth found her gaze drawn to Cole's silhouette against the star-filled sky. The stoic cowboy who had appeared from nowhere to create a path when none seemed possible, now guarded their sleep with the same quiet determination with which he faced everything. What would happen, she wondered as sleep claimed her, when they reached Lewiston? Would he simply ride away once Holloway was dealt with, continuing his solitary journey? The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest, one she was too tired to examine closely as darkness enveloped her consciousness. She dreamed of rushing water and strong arms, of maps that led nowhere and everywhere at once, and of gray eyes that saw too much and revealed too little. A hand on her shoulder woke her some time later. "Ellie," Cole's voice came soft in the darkness. "Your watch." Elizabeth blinked away sleep, surprised he'd actually woken her as promised. "Anything to report?" "All quiet," he replied, settling beside her. "But stay alert, we're being followed." That banished the last vestiges of drowsiness. "Holloway," Cole nodded grimly. "Spotted their campfire about 3 miles back just before sunset. They're moving cautiously, which buys us time, but they're definitely on our trail." Elizabeth's hand moved instinctively to the revolver beside her bedroll. "How many?" "At least 3, possibly all 5. Cole ran a hand through his hair. "Our plan becomes more important now. We need to reach that mine by tomorrow evening." "We will," Elizabeth assured him, though uncertainty gnawed at her. With only 2 horses and 5 determined men behind them, their margin for error was vanishingly small. Cole studied her face in the dim starlight. "You should know. If things go wrong, if we get separated somehow, head northwest from the mine. There's a settlement called Eagle's Rest about 20 miles that way. The sheriff there is a good man named Thomas Harper. Tell him Cole Deveraux sent you, and he'll help you reach Lewiston safely." The implication in his words chilled her. "Nothing's going to go wrong," she said with more confidence than she felt. "We'll all reach Lewiston together." Something flickered in Cole's eyes, regret, perhaps, or resignation. "Of course," he agreed, though she sensed he was humoring her. "Just in case." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face as if he might touch her cheek, then withdrew it. "I should get some rest. Wake me at first light." As he turned away, Elizabeth fought the urge to call him back to say, "What exactly?" That in the span of 3 days, this stranger had somehow become important to her in ways she couldn't articulate. That the thought of him sacrificing himself to ensure their escape terrified her. Instead, she said nothing, watching as his breathing eventually deepened into sleep. In the quiet of the night watch, with only the soft sounds of the forest around her, Elizabeth faced the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Cole Deveraux. And tomorrow, they would either escape Holloway together or face whatever end awaited them. Either way, nothing would be the same again. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest as the stars wheeled slowly overhead, marking the passage of time toward an uncertain dawn. The morning brought low clouds and a damp chill that promised rain later. They broke camp quickly, eating a cold breakfast as they prepared the horses. "We should reach the mine by mid-afternoon if we maintain a good pace," Elizabeth said, reviewing their route. "It's in a box canyon that has only one entrance, which could work for or against us." Cole nodded, checking the cinch on his saddle. "We'll approach from the ridge above. That way we can see if Holloway beat us there somehow or set an ambush." "And if he has?" Abigail asked, her usual cheerfulness dampened by the gravity of their situation. "Then we find another way," Cole replied simply. "There's always another path." They rode hard through the morning, alternating who walked to spare the horses. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they entered the foothills, forcing them to slow their pace. By midday, a light rain had begun to fall, turning the ground treacherous and obscuring visibility. "This could work in our favor," Cole commented as they paused to water the horses at a small stream. "Rain will cover our tracks and make it harder for Holloway to follow." Elizabeth nodded, though she was shivering slightly in her damp clothes. "How much farther to the mine?" "About 3 hours, if my bearings are right," Cole replied, studying the surrounding hills. "We should start climbing soon. The canyon is nestled between those two ridges." He pointed northwest. They continued on, the rain gradually intensifying. The path grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses up narrow switchbacks. Elizabeth's boots slipped on the wet rocks, and more than once Cole's steady hand kept her from falling. By late afternoon, they reached a vantage point overlooking the canyon. Below them, partially obscured by mist and rain, lay the abandoned mine, its timber entrance still visible despite years of neglect. "No sign of Holloway," Cole murmured, scanning the area. "But this weather makes it hard to be sure." "What's the plan?" Elizabeth asked, pushing wet hair from her face. Cole considered for a moment. "We go down together. You plant the maps somewhere obvious but not too obvious like they were hidden in haste. Then we leave clear tracks heading into the mine, but actually double back through that ravine." He pointed to a narrow cut in the rock face about 100 yards from the mine entrance. "And if Holloway is already down there waiting?" Abigail questioned. "Then I deal with him," Cole said, his hand resting on his holstered revolver. "And you two run." "No arguments," he added firmly when Elizabeth opened her mouth to protest. The descent into the canyon was treacherous, the rain-slick path barely wide enough for the horses. They moved with agonizing slowness, aware that a single misstep could send them tumbling down the steep slope. When they finally reached the canyon floor, the mine entrance loomed before them, a dark maw in the rock face, partially collapsed, but still passable. Old mining equipment lay scattered about, rusted and half buried in decades of accumulated soil. "This is perfect," Elizabeth commented, surveying the site, "convincing enough to keep them occupied for days." Cole nodded in agreement. "Where will you hide the maps?" Elizabeth considered, then pointed to a weathered wooden box half hidden under the remains of a collapsed lean-to. "There. It looks like something Father might have used to store his equipment." While Cole kept watch, Elizabeth and Abigail worked quickly to make the site look recently visited. They disturbed the ground in front of the mine entrance, left a partially eaten meal by a hastily constructed fire pit, and finally placed the falsified maps in the wooden box under a layer of old tools. "Now for the tricky part," Cole said as they finished. "We need to leave obvious tracks into the mine, then vanish." He led the horses into the mine entrance, walking them about 20 feet in before backing them out carefully, stepping in the same prints. Then, with practiced skill, he used branches to brush away their actual footprints leading to the ravine that would serve as their escape route. "If Holloway is half the tracker I think he is, this won't fool him for long," Cole admitted. "But it might buy us enough time to reach the main road to Lewiston." They were halfway to the ravine when a voice called out, freezing them in place. "That's far enough, Deveraux." Holloway emerged from behind a large boulder, rifle aimed steadily at Cole's chest. Behind him, two more men appeared, both similarly armed. "Throw down your gun," Holloway commanded. "Nice and slow." Cole's expression remained impassive as he carefully removed his revolver and tossed it aside. "Been expecting you, Holloway." The outlaw's mouth twisted in a smirk. "I bet you have. Been on your trail since Montana, watching you chase your own tail." His cold eyes shifted to Elizabeth and Abigail. "Found some company along the way, I see." "Leave them out of this," Cole said, his voice dangerously calm. "Your quarrels with me." Holloway laughed. "My quarrels with anyone standing between me and Franklin's gold. And right now, that's all three of you." He gestured with his rifle. "The maps. Where are they?" Elizabeth stepped forward, ignoring Cole's warning glance. "We don't have them. We burned them after Father died." "Lying doesn't become you, Miss Franklin," Holloway sneered. "Your father boasted about those maps in every saloon from here to Denver, said they'd make his girls richer than Croesus." His eyes narrowed. "Now, I'll ask one more time before I start getting impatient. Where are they?" Cole moved subtly, positioning himself between Holloway and the sisters. "If there were maps, why would they bring them here? This mine's been played out for decades." Something flickered in Holloway's expression, doubt perhaps. "Search the area," he ordered his men. "Tear it apart if you have to." As the two outlaws began ransacking the abandoned camp, Holloway kept his rifle trained on Cole. "Your brother was stubborn too, right up until the end." Cole's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, his eyes never leaving Holloway's face. "Boss," one of the men called from near the lean-to. "Found something." Holloway's triumphant smile sent a chill through Elizabeth as the outlaw held up the wooden box containing her falsified maps. Well, what do we have here?" While Holloway was momentarily distracted examining the contents of the box, Cole moved a blur of action that caught everyone by surprise. He tackled Holloway just as the outlaw was raising his rifle, sending both men crashing to the ground. "Run!" Cole shouted to Elizabeth and Abigail as he grappled with Holloway for control of the weapon. Elizabeth grabbed her sister's hand and pulled her toward the ravine, even as gunfire erupted behind them. A bullet splintered rock near her head, and she pushed Abigail down behind a boulder. "The horses," Abigail gasped, pointing to where their mounts were tethered near the mine entrance. "No time," Elizabeth replied, her eyes scanning desperately for a path to safety. The ravine was now blocked by one of Holloway's men, while the other was circling to cut off their escape route up the canyon. Behind them, Cole and Holloway continued their desperate struggle, rolling dangerously close to the edge of a steep drop that Elizabeth hadn't noticed before, a natural cliff that fell away into a misty abyss. "We're trapped," Abigail whispered, her face pale with terror. Elizabeth looked from the approaching outlaws to the cliff, where Cole fought for his life and theirs. They were caught between certain death in one direction and likely death in the other. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a shot rang out from somewhere above, then another and another. One of Holloway's men fell, clutching his shoulder. The other dove for cover. "What's happening?" Abigail asked, peering cautiously around the boulder. Before Elizabeth could answer, a voice called down from the ridge. "Franklin sisters, head for the cliff edge. There's a path down the south face." Elizabeth looked up to see a rider on the ridge above, rifle in hand. Behind him, several more mounted figures appeared through the rain and mist. "Who is that?" Abigail wondered. "I don't know," Elizabeth admitted, "but right now I'll take any help we can get." She glanced toward Cole, who was still locked in combat with Holloway, both men bloodied and exhausted. "We need to help Cole first." Drawing the small derringer she kept hidden in her boot, a parting gift from her father, Elizabeth took careful aim at Holloway's struggling form. The tiny gun had limited range and accuracy, but at this distance, she might have a chance. She fired, the shot going wide but distracting Holloway enough for Cole to gain the upper hand. He delivered a powerful blow to the outlaw's jaw, sending him sprawling. Cole staggered to his feet, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. His gaze found Elizabeth's across the distance between them, relief visible even from afar. "The cliff," Elizabeth shouted to him, pointing toward where their mysterious saviors had indicated. "There's a path." Cole nodded in understanding, retrieving his revolver from where it had fallen during the struggle. He fired twice at Holloway's men, forcing them back into cover, then sprinted toward the sisters. "Go," he urged as he reached them, pushing them toward the cliff edge. "I'll cover you." Elizabeth hesitated, unwilling to leave him behind. "Please, Ellie," Cole's voice softened, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I'll be right behind you." Something in his expression convinced her. Taking Abigail's hand, she ran toward the cliff, searching desperately for the promised path. At first, there seemed to be nothing but the sheer drop. Then, as they neared the edge, Elizabeth spotted a narrow trail, almost invisible from a distance, winding down the face of the cliff. "There." She pointed, relief flooding through her. They had just reached the start of the path when a roar of fury turned them around. Holloway, blood streaming down his face, charged toward them with murderous intent, his rifle raised. Cole stepped into his path, revolver steady. "It's over, Holloway." "Not while I breathe," the outlaw snarled and fired. Cole dodged sideways, returning fire. Both men missed in the rain and fading light. Holloway charged forward, using his rifle as a club when Cole came within reach. The blow caught Cole in the ribs, right where his earlier wound was still healing. He staggered, momentarily vulnerable, and Holloway pressed his advantage, driving Cole backward toward the cliff edge where Elizabeth and Abigail stood frozen in horror. "Cole!" Elizabeth cried as he teetered at the brink, locked in Holloway's grip. With a supreme effort, Cole twisted, using Holloway's momentum against him. For a breathless moment, both men balanced on the cliff's edge, then Cole tore himself free, and Holloway, unable to stop his forward motion, plunged into the misty void below, his scream fading into the vastness. Cole collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. Elizabeth rushed to his side, supporting him as he struggled to stand. "We need to move," he managed between labored breaths. "His men are still out there." More shots rang out from above as their mysterious allies continued to provide cover fire, driving the remaining outlaws back toward the mine entrance. "Can you make it down the path?" Elizabeth asked, eyeing Cole's injuries with concern. He nodded grimly. "No choice. Lead the way." The descent was harrowing, a narrow track barely wide enough for single file, slippery with rain and loose stones. Elizabeth went first, then Abigail, with Cole bringing up the rear despite his injuries. Twice Cole nearly fell, saved only by Elizabeth's quick reactions as she steadied him from below. By the time they reached the bottom of the cliff, twilight had deepened into dusk, and the rain had finally stopped. A winding creek bed led away from the base of the cliff, offering a natural path through the rocky terrain. They followed it for perhaps half a mile before the sound of horses approaching brought them to a halt. "Get behind me," Cole ordered, drawing his revolver despite the fact that he was swaying slightly from exhaustion and pain. Instead of Holloway's remaining men, however, it was their saviors from the ridge who appeared around the bend, 5 riders led by a tall man with a sheriff's badge gleaming on his chest. "Thomas." Cole lowered his weapon in disbelief. The sheriff smiled broadly as he dismounted. Cole Deveraux. Should have known you'd be in the middle of this mess. Elizabeth recalled the name Cole had mentioned the night before. Thomas Harper, the sheriff from Eagle's Rest. "How did you find us?" Cole asked, accepting the man's outstretched hand. "Got word that Holloway was in the area and you weren't far behind," Thomas replied. "Figured you might need some help settling that old score." His gaze shifted to Elizabeth and Abigail. "The Franklin sisters, I presume," Elizabeth nodded, still processing their sudden rescue. "Yes." "How did you know?" "News travels. Your father was well respected in these parts." The sheriff turned back to Cole. "Holloway, dead," Cole answered simply, "but at least 2 of his men are still up there." Thomas nodded to his deputies. "Round them up. And check if there are any more hiding in the area." As the men rode off, Thomas looked more closely at Cole's condition. "You look like you've been through hell, my friend." "Feels like it too," Cole admitted with a wry smile that turned into a grimace as he finally allowed himself to acknowledge his injuries. "Let's get you all to Eagle's Rest," Thomas decided. "It's closer than Lewiston, and you could use a doctor and a proper bed." Elizabeth moved to Cole's side, supporting him as he swayed again. "Thank you, Sheriff. We're in your debt." Thomas waved off her thanks. "Any friend of Cole's is a friend of mine. Besides, we've been wanting to clear Holloway's gang out of our territory for months. You did us a favor." As they mounted the horses, Thomas had brought Cole sharing with Elizabeth. Despite his protests that he could ride alone, Elizabeth found herself studying the man beside her with new eyes. He had appeared when they needed him most, created a path when none seemed possible, and risked his life repeatedly for 2 women he barely knew. And somewhere along the way, between danger and salvation, she had fallen irrevocably in love with him. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, as she felt his solid warmth against her back and his arms secure around her waist, Elizabeth Franklin felt, for the first time in months, that she might have found her way home. Eagle's Rest proved to be a small but thriving settlement nestled in a valley between protective mountains. Unlike many frontier towns that consisted of little more than a main street and scattered buildings, Eagle's Rest had the feel of permanent sturdy structures, neat fences, even a few trees planted along its central avenue. They arrived well after dark, weary to the bone. Sheriff Harper led them directly to the town doctor, who clucked disapprovingly over Cole's various injuries. Cracked ribs, possible concussion, and these stitches looked like they were done by a butcher. The elderly physician grumbled as he examined Cole. "Actually, I did those," Elizabeth admitted. The doctor glanced up, reassessing her. "Well, not bad for field medicine, miss. You've steady hands." "Thank you," Elizabeth replied, unexpectedly pleased by the professional acknowledgement. "Will he be all right?" "Nothing time and rest won't heal," the doctor assured her, "though knowing this one, rest is the harder prescription to fill." He gave Cole a stern look. 2 weeks minimum, Deveraux. No riding, no fighting, no heroics." Cole opened his mouth to protest, but subsided under the combined weight of the doctor's glare and Elizabeth's concern. "Fine," he conceded. 2 weeks. After tending to Cole's wounds and checking the sisters for any injuries they might have overlooked, the doctor pronounced them all in need of food and sleep, in that order. Sheriff Harper escorted them to the town's small hotel, where the proprietress, a kind-faced widow named Mrs. Simmons, fussed over them like lost children. Sheriffs explained everything, she assured them, showing Elizabeth and Abigail to a comfortable room. "You poor dears, running from those awful men, you'll be safe here, I promise." Cole was given the room next door, despite his insistence that he could sleep at the sheriff's office to save them the expense. "Nonsense," Mrs. Simmons declared. Any man who saves 2 ladies from bandits deserves a proper bed. Now, I've sent for hot water for baths and will have dinner brought up shortly. No arguments, she added when Cole tried to speak. When she had bustled away, Thomas chuckled. No use fighting it, Cole. Martha Simmons is the closest thing we have to royalty in Eagle's Rest. What she says goes. After the sheriff left to check on his deputy's progress with Holloway's remaining men, Elizabeth and Abigail gratefully availed themselves of the promised baths, taking turns in the copper tub behind a privacy screen. I can't believe we're finally safe, Abigail sighed, brushing out her damp hair as Elizabeth soaked in the still warm water. No more running, no more fear. For now, Elizabeth cautioned, though she too felt the relief of sanctuary. We still need to reach Lewiston eventually. Why? Abigail asked, surprising her sister. What's in Lewiston that isn't here? Cousin Margaret is practically a stranger to us. We could stay. Elizabeth emerged from behind the screen, wrapped in a borrowed dressing gown. Stay in Eagle's Rest, Abigail nodded enthusiastically. Why not? It seems like a nice town, and… She hesitated, a knowing smile playing at her lips. There might be reasons to consider it. If you're referring to Cole, Elizabeth began, feeling color rise to her cheeks. Of course I'm referring to Cole, Abigail laughed. Ellie, I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at him, and he clearly cares for you too. He was doing his job, Elizabeth protested weakly. Protecting us. Abigail raised an eyebrow. His job. The man resigned his badge to hunt Holloway. He had no obligation to help us, yet he risked his life repeatedly. She set down her brush, her expression turning serious. Life is too short and too uncertain to deny what's right in front of you, Ellie. Father taught us that, if nothing else. Before Elizabeth could formulate a response, a knock at the door announced the arrival of their dinner. Mrs. Simmons herself brought in a tray laden with roast chicken, fresh bread, and vegetables, the first proper meal they'd had in days. I've taken a tray to Mr. Deveraux as well, she informed them, though I had to threaten to tie him to the bed to make him stay there. Stubborn man, that one. Elizabeth couldn't help but smile. Yes, he is. Mrs. Simmons gave her a knowing look. Stubborn men often make the best husbands, dear. They know their own minds. With that parting wisdom, she left them to their meal. Abigail dissolved into giggles the moment the door closed. Even Mrs. Simmons sees it. Oh, hush, Elizabeth replied, though she couldn't quite suppress her own smile. Eat your dinner before it gets cold. Later, after Abigail had fallen into an exhausted sleep, Elizabeth found herself restless despite her own fatigue. Their room overlooked the small town square, peaceful now in the late-night stillness. A few lamps still burned in windows, and the sheriff's office across the way showed signs of activity as Thomas and his deputies processed the prisoners they'd captured. Elizabeth's thoughts turned inevitably to Cole. Was he resting as the doctor had ordered, or was he as wakeful as she? The events of the past days played through her mind like scenes from a dime novel: their desperate flight, the river crossing, the final confrontation at the cliff. Through it all, Cole had been their steadfast protector, their guide, their savior. Yet he was also a man with his own wounds, both physical and emotional, his own quest for justice that had driven him across territories in pursuit of his brother's killers. Now that quest was complete. Holloway was dead, his gang captured or scattered. What would Cole do next? Return to Texas? Continue his solitary wanderings? The thought of him riding away brought an ache to Elizabeth's chest that she could no longer pretend was anything but what it was: the pain of impending loss. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Wrapping her borrowed dressing gown more securely around herself, Elizabeth opened it cautiously. Cole stood in the hallway, looking somewhat abashed. He'd cleaned up, his dark hair still damp from washing, and wore a fresh shirt that must have been loaned to him. The bruises on his face stood out starkly against his tanned skin, but his eyes were clear as they met hers. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said quietly. "I saw the light under your door and thought you might still be awake." "I couldn't sleep," Elizabeth admitted, stepping into the hallway and pulling the door nearly closed to avoid waking Abigail. "Too much on my mind, I suppose." Cole nodded in understanding. "Same here. I wanted to make sure you and Abby were truly all right. Sometimes the shock of events like today doesn't hit until later." His concern touched her. "We're fine, thanks to you. The doctor should be more worried about your condition than ours." A rueful smile tugged at Cole's mouth. "I've had worse." "That's not as reassuring as you might think," Elizabeth replied dryly. They stood in awkward silence for a moment until Cole spoke again. "Thomas brought news while you were resting. They've rounded up the rest of Holloway's gang. It's over, Elizabeth, truly over." She searched his face. "And your quest for justice for your brother, complete," he confirmed, "though it feels different than I expected, less satisfying somehow." "Vengeance often does, I imagine," Elizabeth said softly. "It can't bring back what was lost." Cole's gaze grew distant. "No, it can't. But it might prevent others from suffering the same fate." He refocused on her. "What will you do now? Continue to Lewiston as planned?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Elizabeth found herself at a crossroads, one path leading to the safe, expected future she had planned, the other to something unknown but potentially far more meaningful. "I'm not sure," she answered honestly. "Abby mentioned the possibility of staying in Eagle's Rest, at least for a while." Something flickered in Cole's eyes, hope, perhaps. "It's a good town, peaceful, growing, the kind of place where two educated women might find opportunities." "And what about you?" Elizabeth asked, her heart beating faster. "What does your future hold now that your quest is complete?" Cole took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool hallway. "That depends," he said, his voice low and intimate. "On what? On whether there's a reason to stay." His gaze held hers, searching. "Is there, Ellie?" The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility. Elizabeth thought of all the practical reasons to hesitate. They'd known each other such a short time. Her responsibilities to Abigail, the uncertainty of frontier life. Yet in the face of his steady gaze, those concerns seemed to fade into insignificance. "Yes," she whispered finally. "I believe there is." Cole's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his calloused palm. "I've never met anyone like you, Elizabeth Franklin. Brave, intelligent, loyal, beautiful." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "From the moment I saw you on that cliff, something in me recognized something in you, as if I'd been searching without knowing what I was looking for until I found you." Elizabeth leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "I felt it too. Even when I was fighting it, even when it seemed impossible or impractical, I knew." When his lips finally met hers, it felt like the culmination of a journey that had begun the moment he appeared on that ridge to save them, a path that had been leading them to each other all along. The kiss was gentle at first, mindful of his injuries and the public setting, but it deepened as Elizabeth responded with all the emotion she'd been holding in check. His arm circled her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands came to rest on his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I know it's soon," he murmured. "Too soon by any reasonable standard. But life out here has taught me that tomorrow isn't guaranteed, so I need to say this now. I love you, Elizabeth Franklin. And if you'll give me the chance, I'd like to build a life with you, wherever that might be." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from a joy so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too, Cole Deveraux, and I can't think of anything I want more than a future with you." His smile, full and unguarded for perhaps the first time since she'd met him, transformed his face, erasing years of hardship and solitude. "Then, we'll make it happen together." A door opening further down the hallway reminded them of their surroundings. Cole reluctantly stepped back, though his hand sought hers, unwilling to break contact entirely. "We should probably continue this conversation tomorrow," he suggested, "when we're both rested and I'm less likely to be scolded by the doctor for being out of bed." Elizabeth laughed softly. "A wise decision. Tomorrow, then." "Tomorrow," he agreed, raising her hand to his lips for one final kiss before releasing it. "Sleep well, Ellie. You too, Cole." As she slipped back into her room, closing the door softly behind her, Elizabeth felt as though she was floating. Across the room, Abigail stirred and sat up, blinking sleepily. "Was someone at the door?" she mumbled. Elizabeth crossed to sit on the edge of her sister's bed. "It was Cole," she admitted, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. Abigail came fully awake at that, her eyes widening. And Elizabeth smiled. "It seems we'll be staying in Eagle's Rest after all." Abigail launched herself at her sister, embracing her fiercely. "I knew it. I knew he loved you." "SHH," Elizabeth laughed, returning the hug. "You'll wake the whole hotel." "I don't care," Abigail declared, though she lowered her voice. "This is the most romantic thing that's ever happened. He appeared out of nowhere, saved us from outlaws, nearly died protecting us. It's like something from a novel." Elizabeth had to admit there was some truth to her sister's romantic framing of events. "Life rarely follows the path we expect," she said thoughtfully. "A week ago, we were running for our lives with no clear destination. And now you're in love and we have a new home and everything's going to be wonderful," Abigail finished for her. "See, Father was right after all. He always said our future was waiting for us out west. He just didn't know it would come in the form of a handsome cowboy." Elizabeth smiled at her sister's enthusiasm. "Speaking of Father, there's something we need to discuss. His maps, the real ones." Abigail's expression grew serious. "You mean the silver mine locations?" Elizabeth nodded. "I've been thinking about what to do with that knowledge. Father wanted it to secure our future, but after everything that's happened, I'm not sure wealth is worth the cost." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Elizabeth took a deep breath, "that perhaps we should share the information with the proper authorities, let them handle it legally. We could still benefit, claim a finder's fee or small percentage, but without the danger that comes with such valuable knowledge." Abigail considered this. "Father would want us to be safe above all," she said finally. "And with you and Cole," she smiled. "Well, our future seems secure in ways that have nothing to do with silver mines." Elizabeth squeezed her sister's hand gratefully. "We'll talk to Sheriff Harper tomorrow, see what he recommends." As they settled back to sleep, Elizabeth's mind filled with possibilities she hadn't dared consider before. A home, perhaps a small business of their own, a life built with Cole beside her. The path ahead might still hold challenges, but for the first time since their father's death, Elizabeth felt certain they were heading in the right direction. Outside, the stars shone over Eagle's Rest, their light a silent witness to the new beginnings taking shape beneath them. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous day's storm had washed away more than just the physical dust of their journey. Elizabeth woke feeling rested for the first time in weeks, despite the lateness of her conversation with Cole. She and Abigail dressed in clean clothes provided by Mrs. Simmons' simple day dresses that were slightly too large but far better than their travel-worn garments. After a hearty breakfast in the hotel's small dining room, they sought out Sheriff Harper at his office. Cole was already there, looking more rested himself though still moving carefully to accommodate his injuries. His face brightened visibly when Elizabeth entered, drawing a knowing smile from Thomas. "Ladies," the sheriff greeted them, rising from behind his desk. "I trust you slept well." "Better than we have in a long time," Elizabeth confirmed, "thanks to your hospitality and intervention yesterday." Thomas waved off her thanks. "Just doing my job and helping an old friend," he added with a nod toward Cole. "Speaking of which, we've got Holloway's remaining men locked up tight. They'll stand trial in Boise next month." "Good," Cole said with satisfaction. "James would appreciate the proper legal handling." "There's something else we need to discuss," Elizabeth said, glancing at Cole. "About our father's discovery." Cole had already told Thomas about the maps and Holloway's pursuit of them, but not the true nature of what Franklin had found. Elizabeth explained about the silver deposit's 3 separate veins that her father had located in the mountains north of Eagle's Rest, all on unclaimed land. "That's quite a discovery," Thomas remarked when she had finished. "No wonder Holloway was so determined." Elizabeth nodded. "The question is what to do with the information now. I memorized the locations before we destroyed the physical maps, but after seeing the violence such knowledge can inspire." "You're wise to be cautious," Thomas agreed. "Silver strikes have turned peaceful communities into battlegrounds before." He considered for a moment. "The territorial governor is a personal friend. If you're willing, I could arrange a meeting. He could help ensure the claims are processed legally, with appropriate recognition of your father's work and your rightful inheritance." "That sounds ideal," Elizabeth said, relief evident in her voice. "In the meantime," Thomas continued, "I'd suggest keeping this information between us. Eagle's Rest is peaceful, but news of silver has a way of traveling fast." Cole, who had been quiet during this exchange, finally spoke. "What are your plans now, Ellie? Will you continue to Lewiston?" The question was posed casually, but Elizabeth could hear the underlying tension in his voice. Their declarations of the previous night still hung between them, unacknowledged in the light of day. "Actually," she replied, meeting his gaze, "we're considering staying in Eagle's Rest." "If that's possible." Thomas looked between them, clearly sensing the undercurrents. "Well, we'd certainly welcome you. Town's growing and we're short on educated folks. The school teacher's been looking for an assistant," he added, looking at Abigail. "And Doc Morgan mentioned just last week that he could use someone with medical knowledge to help with his practice." "That sounds promising," Elizabeth said thoughtfully. Her experience assisting her father had given her a solid foundation in basic medicine, as her tending to Cole's wounds had demonstrated. "And housing?" Cole asked, his eyes never leaving Elizabeth's face. Thomas smiled knowingly. "As it happens, there's a small house on the edge of town that's been sitting empty. Nothing fancy, but sound and clean. Previous owner was a surveyor, as it happens. Moved back east last year for his health." "That sounds perfect," Abigail declared, looking meaningfully at her sister. "Don't you think, Ellie?" Elizabeth felt a blush rise to her cheeks under the combined gazes of everyone in the room. "It does sound suitable," she managed, "though we'd need to discuss terms." "I might have a solution for that as well," Cole interjected, his expression softening as he addressed Elizabeth directly. "If you'd be willing to hear me out." Thomas cleared his throat. "And that's my cue to show Abigail around town. Come along, Miss Franklin. I believe Mrs. Bennett at the general store was asking about you." He ushered a grinning Abigail out of the office, closing the door firmly behind them. Alone now, Cole moved closer to Elizabeth, taking both her hands in his. "I meant what I said last night," he began. "Every word." As did I, she assured him, her heart beating rapidly. But Cole, we should be practical. We've known each other such a short time, and he placed a gentle finger against her lips, silencing her. Ellie, I've spent the last 2 years of my life chasing vengeance. Before that, I wore a badge and lived by the rules and regulations it represented. I've always been practical, cautious, methodical. His smile turned rueful. And I've never been as happy as I've been these past few days, despite all the danger and uncertainty, because you were beside me. Elizabeth felt tears threatening at the simple honesty in his words. I feel the same, she admitted, which terrifies me because it defies all logic. Cole's laugh was warm and genuine. Maybe that's how we know it's real. Logic doesn't account for the heart. He sobered, his expression turning earnest. I'm not asking for certainty, Ellie, just a chance to build something together day by day. The house Thomas mentioned, it could be a home for you and Abby, a place to establish yourselves in Eagle's Rest. And you? Elizabeth asked softly. Where would you be? Wherever you are, he answered simply. If you'll have me. I've been offered the deputy position here. Thomas has been wanting to retire for a while, train someone to take over as sheriff eventually. The prospect of Cole settling in Eagle's Rest, building a life there with her, filled Elizabeth with a joy she hadn't dared imagine possible. You'd give up the trail for a sheriff's office. I'd give up the trail for you, he corrected gently. The badge is just a bonus. A way to use the skills I have to protect a community instead of pursuing vengeance. Elizabeth searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his gray eyes. And Abby is your family, which means she would be my family too, Cole said without hesitation. The house has room for all of us, until such time as she might wish for independence or other arrangements, he smiled. She's a remarkable young woman. I suspect she'll have suitors lining up once you're settled. Elizabeth couldn't help but laugh at the protective note that had crept into his voice. You sound like a brother-in-law already. I'd rather sound like a husband, Cole replied, his smile fading into something more serious. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. This was my mother's. I've carried it with me since she passed, waiting for the right person to give it to. Elizabeth's breath caught as he dropped to one knee before her, wincing slightly at the movement but determined nonetheless. I know it's fast, he acknowledged. I know we have much to learn about each other still, but I also know, with a certainty I've never felt before, that you are the woman I want to spend my life with. He held up the ring. Elizabeth Franklin, will you marry me? Not necessarily today or tomorrow, but when you're ready. For all her practical nature, all her careful planning and cautious approach to life, Elizabeth found the answer required no thought at all. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly. Yes, Cole Deveraux, I will marry you. His smile could have lit the darkest night as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if destiny had arranged it. When he stood and pulled her into his embrace, his kiss spoke of promises and futures and paths yet to be traveled together. Later, when they shared their news with an ecstatic Abigail and an unsurprised Thomas, plans were quickly set in motion. The house Thomas had mentioned was indeed perfect, a modest but well-built structure with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and even a small garden that had gone wild in its owner's absence. Within a week, the sisters had moved in, their few remaining possessions supplemented by generous donations from the townspeople, who had embraced the romantic tale of their rescue and Cole's courtship with enthusiasm. Cole took the deputy position, working alongside Thomas while continuing to recover from his injuries. The territorial governor, true to Thomas's word, arranged for the silver claims to be registered in the Franklin sisters' names, with provisions for controlled development that would benefit both them and the territory. By the time autumn painted the surrounding mountains in gold and crimson, Elizabeth had established herself as Doc Morgan's assistant, while Abigail flourished as the schoolteacher's apprentice. The town embraced them both, their father's reputation and their own capabilities, earning them respect beyond their connection to the well-liked deputy. The wedding took place on a crisp October day, with the entire town turning out to celebrate. Abigail served as Elizabeth's maid of honor, while Thomas stood as Cole's best man. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, the couple exchanging vows in Eagles Rest small church before a reception that spilled into the town square. Mrs. Deveraux, Cole murmured as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Elizabeth smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting with happiness. "I think it sounds perfect." As the music played and lanterns glowed in the gathering dusk, Elizabeth caught sight of Abigail dancing with Thomas's young nephew, her laughter bright in the autumn air. All around them, the townspeople who had become their community celebrated their union. "Thank you," she said softly to her new husband. Cole's brow furrowed slightly. "For what? For appearing when we needed you most, for making a path when there seemed to be none." She reached up to touch his face, now healed of the bruises from their ordeal. "For loving me." His arms tightened around her waist. "That's the easiest thing I've ever done, Ellie, and I plan to keep doing it for the rest of our lives." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elizabeth Franklin Deveraux knew that the path that had seemed so uncertain just months ago had led her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of the man who had risked everything to save her, in a town that had welcomed them both home, with a future bright with promise stretching endlessly before them. Their love story had begun with danger and desperation on a cliff edge, but it would continue in peace and joy in the small frontier town that had given them a second chance at happiness. And that, Elizabeth thought as Cole's lips found hers once more, was the most beautiful path of all. 5 years later, the house at the edge of Eagles Rest had expanded to accommodate its growing family. A new wing had been added for Abigail, who now served as the town's head teacher, but still preferred to live with her sister and brother-in-law. The garden had been tamed and enlarged, producing vegetables and flowers in abundance under Elizabeth's careful tending. On the wide front porch, Elizabeth sat in a rocking chair, watching as Cole taught their 3-year-old son James to ride his first pony, a gentle creature that plodded patiently around the yard while the boy squealed with delight. Beside her, their 1-year-old daughter Sarah slept peacefully in her cradle, her tiny features a perfect blend of her parents. Sheriff Deveraux for Cole had indeed taken over when Thomas retired 2 years prior, was as natural a father as he had been a protector. The town had flourished under his steady guidance, growing into a respectable settlement known for its safety and prosperity. The controlled development of the silver mines had brought wealth to the region without the chaos that often accompanied such discoveries. Elizabeth and Abigail had used their portion of the proceeds to establish a proper clinic and school, investments in the community that had earned them the respect and gratitude of all. As she watched her husband lift their laughing son from the pony's back and swing him high in the air, Elizabeth reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From desperate flight to profound love, from uncertainty to security, from strangers to family, each step had led them exactly where they were meant to be. Cole looked up, catching her gaze across the yard. His smile, still capable of making her heart skip after all these years, brightened as he set James down and whispered something in the boy's ear. The child nodded enthusiastically and ran toward the porch. "Mama," James called as he bounded up the steps. "Papa says to tell you he loves you more than the stars in the sky," Elizabeth laughed, pulling her son onto her lap. Did he now? And what do you think about that? James considered this with all the seriousness a 3-year-old could muster. I think Papa's right. But I love you more than the moon. Well, I love you more than all the planets combined, Elizabeth declared, dropping a kiss on his dark curls so like his father's. Cole joined them on the porch, his footsteps familiar and comforting on the wooden boards. He bent to check on Sarah, brushing a gentle finger across her sleeping cheek, then moved to stand behind Elizabeth's chair, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. Beautiful evening, he commented, looking out over the town that had become their home. In the distance, church bells rang, announcing the end of the day. Perfect, Elizabeth agreed, reaching up to cover his hand with hers, their matching wedding bands catching the light of the setting sun. James squirmed off her lap, his boundless energy sending him in pursuit of a butterfly that had ventured into the yard. They watched him in contented silence, the moment peaceful in its ordinary perfection. I was thinking, Cole said after a while, that it's been 5 years since we met. Elizabeth smiled, surprised and touched that he had remembered. On a cliff edge with outlaws at our backs. Not the most conventional beginning, he acknowledged with a chuckle, but I wouldn't change a moment of it. Nor would I, Elizabeth replied, tilting her head back to look up at him. Despite the years that had passed, despite the familiarity of marriage and parenthood, she still felt that same flutter in her heart when their eyes met. Every step led us here. Cole leaned down to kiss her, a tender gesture that spoke of enduring love and deepened connection. And there's nowhere else I'd rather be, Ellie. Nowhere in this world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the Deveraux family remained on their porch, together in the home they had built from courage and love. The path that had once seemed impossible had become their life's journey, one they would continue to travel, side by side, for all the days to come. And in the quiet of the evening, with her family gathered close, Elizabeth knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most unexpected paths led to the most beautiful destinations. The end.